Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Rob Fleming, the Education Minister for the Province of British Columbia, and I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. I also want at the outset to acknowledge that today is the National Day of Mourning for working people in British Columbia and Canada, a day to remember and honour 140 BC workers who tragically lost their lives last year to workplace injury or disease. With me here today in the Press Theatre is the Deputy Minister of Education, Scott MacDonald, and the President of the BC School Trustees Association, Stephanie Higginson. We've invited you to join us today to provide you with an update on all the work that's happening in the K-12 education system to make sure that BC students and their families can continue their learning during this pandemic. This briefing is about an overview of all the things that are happening in BC's school system. It is not an announcement about BC schools reopening. After I provide an update, Stephanie will make remarks on behalf of school trustees, and then we will open it up to questions. I'm very grateful for the dedication of everybody involved in BC's K-12 community, specifically students, parents, support staff, and educators, all essential as we navigate through this very difficult, unprecedented time together. The work we're seeing throughout BC and in our schools and in our homes is truly incredible given the circumstances and the hand that we've been dealt by this vicious pandemic. Here in BC, we're fortunate to have partners in the K-12 education system who are dedicated to the needs of our students and families. As you'll recall, we made a decision to suspend in-person classroom instruction on March the 17th, then under the direction of the Provincial Health Officer to help mitigate the spread of COVID-19. Face-to-face instruction continues to be suspended for the majority of students in the province, although schools remain open for some students, including the children of essential service workers and those that are vulnerable and need more learning supports. All schools in BC, both public and independent, are operating under the guidelines established by the Provincial Health Officer and the Centre for Disease Control to ensure the safety of our students and education professionals. I'm proud of the incredible amount of work that has been done in the last 5 weeks to make sure our kids can keep learning. We've worked closely with all 60 school districts, independent school authorities, First Nation schools, teachers, school leaders, support staff, public health officials, and all our education partners on a coordinated approach. This work is led by our Ministry Integrated Planning Framework and guidelines developed by the Ministry to support school districts and independent school authorities in their planning and delivery of educational opportunities and supports during this pandemic. These guidelines are continuously updated with new information, resources, and examples of best practices that are inspiring to one another no matter what part of the province we live in. The Ministry also developed a teaching guide to help teachers as they educate our students in a very, very different way under these circumstances. And we've ensured teachers can connect with their students by video conferencing technology, providing access to a secure enterprise version of Zoom. We have onboarded to date more than 20,000 BC teachers who instruct more than 275,000 students with the Zoom Enterprise video conferencing program. Other video conferencing platforms are being utilized in different parts of the province by the teaching workforce right across BC. For parents and educators, the Ministry launched the Keep Learning website, where families can access free learning resources to supplement schoolwork, as well as get tips on how to help children learn and how to ensure the well-being while they're at home. This site is very well utilized indeed and has seen more than 300,000 unique views since it was launched at the end of March. Our government knows that mental health is particularly important right now for children and young people. Through a partnership with the WE organization, we've made sure students and teachers have access to learning resources through the WE Schools program that support mental well-being, resiliency, and connectedness. We also offer crisis supports for those students that are involved and are battling mental health and addictions issues, for teenagers through our Foundry Community Wellness Hubs and communities right across BC. Recently, we invested $3 million more into public libraries to enhance digital literacy, supports and programs, e-books, and to provide another layer of online learning support for families. Schools and classrooms are developing flexible and innovative ways to accommodate the needs of each school community. BC is a diverse province. We know that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to continued learning, but all districts and education partners are guided by the same set of 4 ministry-developed principles in their planning. The first is to ensure a healthy and safe environment for all students, families, and employees in every school setting in BC. The second is to provide the services needed to support children of our essential workers, which is happening now across the province. The third is to support vulnerable students who may need special assistance. And the fourth is to provide continuity of educational opportunities for all students. In BC, our government has put a strong focus on vulnerable students and making sure the children of our frontline health workers are supported and their children are cared for at school so they can keep helping British Columbians. Schools have also proactively identified supports or accommodations to support learning for students with disabilities. But more needs to be done for this group of learners, and we are working with MCFD, school districts, and special needs parent advocacy organizations to deliver more help to parents and kids with complex learning needs. School districts and independent schools are now weeks into actively providing learning opportunities for students. Learning is occurring both with and without technology. Districts are making sure families who don't have access to technology are getting the help they need by loaning out their equipment. And to date, more than 23,000 computers and devices are being loaned to students so they can continue their education. School districts have redeployed their IT and computer technicians to provide tech support for families to help remote learning technology in their homes. Our government has worked with internet service providers to ensure families have low-cost internet or created local internet hotspots so free Wi-Fi is available to multiple families in a community or on a First Nations reserve. Where online learning isn't possible, schools are continuing to deliver printed learning packages to students or flash drives with everything a student needs to continue learning at home. We're also seeing some school districts who currently have students coming into school buildings in rural and remote communities where schools are often the most reliable place to access Wi-Fi and social distancing can be managed. I'm heartened by the creative and compassionate stories that we hear every day emerging from BC's school system. School communities across the province worked quickly to provide now 75,000 meals delivered to students each week, supporting over 16,000 kids that are otherwise vulnerable and experiencing food insecurity. Teachers, education assistants, administrators, and school support staff are putting together weekly grocery hampers for families, delivering bag lunches to homes or at designated hubs for meal pickup. Just as the ministry and the Provincial Health Office directed school districts to make sure kids are supported to learn at home, we also immediately directed them to provide in-class supports for essential service worker children. Districts provide the same supports to students with special needs and other vulnerable students who may struggle with learning at home. We've worked with the Provincial Health Officer to clarify that these supports can be provided in a safe manner for both students and staff. There are currently several thousand essential service workers, children in public schools, and districts are working to expand this number each and every day and each and every week. An additional 1,300 students who are the children of essential service workers are being supported in independent schools. School districts have been expanding in-home school learning supports for additional occupations on the province's essential service worker list, including those who work in essential retail jobs. To make sure our schools are safe for these students, we worked with the Provincial Health Officer to develop a set of health and safety protocols which all school districts have implemented. This includes controlled access to buildings, maintaining physical distancing amongst staff, and implementing distancing strategies for the students that are in schools. Many sectors in the province are starting to plan for the future, including the education sector. We will continue taking direction from the Provincial Health Officer, from the Premier and Cabinet on when and how schools would be able to increase the number of students receiving in-class instruction and what a phased approach can look like. Right now, we are working with other ministries and our education partners to develop plans for a number of possible scenarios, including resuming some in-class instruction in a controlled and measured way for the future. Ministry staff are researching and we're contacting other jurisdictions to understand the planning and protocols that have been put in place for a controlled return to in-class instruction. New Zealand, for example, students will go back to school starting tomorrow. We are monitoring and learning from places like that in other jurisdictions. This will help us here in British Columbia inform an evidence-based plan for BC which minimizes the risk of COVID-19 transmission when the conditions are appropriate. There's so many people to thank, and I did thank some of them at the outset, but it is really asking people to continue these efforts under very difficult, challenging times in BC and right around the world. Together, our province has made good decisions that have helped contain the spread of COVID-19. Our success in BC thus far has been shaped by being diligent and thoughtful and driven by the science and data constantly assessed by Dr. Bonnie Henry, the PHO, and the CDC. She and her team and Minister Dix will be updating BC's pandemic modeling this Friday. It's important for British Columbians to tune in to that update. Today, it's essential that we all continue to take the necessary preventative measures to keep ourselves, our families, and all British Columbians safe and healthy. We will return to regular school life down the road, and that road will be shorter and sooner if we continue to act together and act now with measures to prevent the further spread of COVID-19. British Columbia has had an internationally recognized and world-class education system before the pandemic, and we will have a world-class education system on the other side of this pandemic. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I want to ask Stephanie to say a few words.
Thank you, Minister. I'd swale. Ikwana Selam Namu, Entapa Stephanie Higginson, Sanitsnas Nunemo. I've just provided you with a Hulkaminum greeting, which is the language of the lands upon which my own school board, the Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools, are situated. I also want to acknowledge that I am grateful to be on the territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nation. On behalf of school trustees everywhere, I want to start by acknowledging and thanking all the students who have had their learning and their lives so deeply impacted by the suspension of in-class instruction, and especially to our graduates. Everyone who works in education does so due to a deep love for their students. Your patience and your resilience and your ability to adapt through this difficult time has been an inspiration, and I raise my hands to all of you. To the families who are adjusting to this new situation, I extend my gratitude and also my understanding. As a working parent of 2 young school-age children myself, I keep reminding myself that I am not my child's teacher, I am their parent. So please don't be too hard on yourself. What you are doing is good enough. Thank you for your patience and your adaptability at this time. And finally, to school and district staff, your willingness and flexibility to adapt to this new reality is a huge part of the province's success in fighting this public health crisis. I raise my hands to those working so hard to meet the diverse needs of students in this current context, and thank you for your willingness to be adaptable and nimble during this time. Your ability to adapt is what has and will continue to make educational programming in this evolving context work for the students of British Columbia. I would like to assure people about the deep and meaningful collaboration between the Ministry of Education and the entire education sector in navigating these uncharted waters together. The ministry's support in providing protocols and guidelines for each district has allowed every board of education to work towards meeting the unique needs of their communities in a culturally, socially, and geographically relevant way. The ministry's efforts are appreciated by every board in the province. This support has been and continues to be integral in ensuring the continuity of learning to students. This health crisis has highlighted the important part that the public education system plays in a well-functioning society. Boards of education across the province are working to fill gaps in need for the families they serve beyond just the delivery of curriculum. As we heard from the minister, we are seeing district food programs adapt and adjust to ensure that students who only get a healthy meal at school continue to have access to healthy food. I am heartened and at times emotional at the effort of student support teachers and educational assistants to adjust their service delivery for some of our most complex and diverse learners, helping families receive the respite they normally get throughout the school day. Trustees for boards of education across British Columbia have long known the important role that public schools play beyond the delivery of curriculum. The ability for each board to pivot and meet these fundamental and diverse needs under challenging circumstances is a testament to how much we all care for our students. Equity is a foundational pillar of our public education system, and this crisis has not and should not knock us off course. It is also important to focus on the tremendous job that people across the system are doing in delivering curriculum to students and their families. Examples include teachers hosting virtual story times, sharing virtual dance lessons, and even virtual band practices. Educational assistants doing social emotional check-ins with students using online group and video chats. Staff and community members working together to ensure vulnerable students who rely on a myriad of school-based support programs continue to receive the supports they need. I know that there may be some gaps as we reconfigure the school system to keep our students, our employees, and their families safe. And if you, as a parent or a caregiver, have concerns, then contact your child's teacher or principal. Many normal school functions are still operating, and your child's teacher and principal want to make sure that they are meeting the needs of every student. Schooling doesn't look the same as it did before, and nor should it. But your child's learning team are still there to support them and you. I want to reassure everyone impacted by the suspension of in-class instruction that throughout this crisis, the ministry, in collaboration with the entire education sector, has taken a measured approach to ensure the health and safety of students, families, and employees under the direction of our provincial health officer. Going forward, whatever the future holds, each Board of Education will respond to direction from the Provincial Health Officer and the Ministry of Education in a way that will meet the unique needs of the communities they serve. That is our job, and we will do it with the health and safety of our students, our staff, our families, and our communities at the core of every decision we make. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we'll take questions now. As a reminder to everybody on the phone, please press *1 to enter the queue. You are limited to one question. Feel free to re-queue up. If we have time, we will get to you. Please unmute your phones. You will not be audible until we call your name. First question is from Richard Zussman, Global News.
Once there is a vaccine for this virus, will it be required that every student that is medically eligible have the vaccine before going to a BC school?
Well, I truly hope that we can discuss such a problem as having a vaccine and how to implement it down the road, and I hope that comes sooner than what many experts are predicting around the world. But I think that in terms of a public health program around vaccination, that is going to be something that has to be widespread in order to be effective in British Columbia. It will need to address British Columbians of all ages. The school system can effectively deliver vaccination programs as we do for other diseases currently.
Next question is from Rob Buffum, CTV.
Oh, hi. I'm just wondering if I know you can't give us a specific date, but Quebec yesterday announced mid-May would be a date for back to school. You mentioned New Zealand. I'm wondering if you can tell us, Minister Fleming, what the likelihood of kids being back in the classroom before the end of this school year is. And on a related note, I guess, whenever it happens, has consideration been given to things like testing teachers for COVID whenever students do get back into the classroom?
Yeah, I would say in terms of the planning, the bulk of the work right now is really around the health and safety protocols, both for staff and students. We have some in place right now, but those are for very, very limited numbers of people in a school building. And if we're going to not flick a switch and start up the school system, but begin to dial up the number of people in schools, we're going to have to update those protocols. So there are a lot of discussions happening about what it would look like in addition to potential timelines. I think perhaps we have an advantage of being able to look at other jurisdictions who, for their own reasons, have announced dates and returns to school that we have not done so thus far in BC. We're in constant contact with other provinces and territories in the country, and as I mentioned in my remarks, the ministry is contacting and researching what jurisdictions are doing in other parts of the world. But we do have the benefit here of having an internationally recognized Center for Disease Control, a public health officer and agency that has been working extremely well, keeping British Columbians safe, and their input, their guidance is crucial.
Karen Larson, CBC. Okay, moving on. Lisa Houston, News 1130.
Minister Fleming, speaking about how many kids are in schools now, can you illuminate for us, like, how many kids are in schools across the province of essential workers, what it's looking like? Are they sitting in classrooms? Are they all separate rooms? Are teachers wearing masks when they're around them? We're just wondering what it looks like now, so maybe we have an image of what comes ahead and looking at what numbers are in there now.
Yeah, it's a fairly small number. As I said, it's just several thousand on a regular school population in the public school system anyway of about 550,000 students. It's mostly in elementary school settings. It's the younger children that can't be home alone, that their parents who are nurses or frontline healthcare workers, they need the school system to be able to report to work to save lives and treat British Columbians. So very small numbers, varies by district, but you know, we hope to expand that because as we've learned during this pandemic, there are a lot of crucially important points in our economy that help sustain all of us if we're to get through this together. So there are other tiers of essential workers who are involved now in the school system. We expect those numbers will grow in the coming weeks because it's necessary to do so to support the economic activity we have, and also the prime directive around maintaining a highly functioning healthcare system.
Next question is from Mary Griffin, Check News.
Oh, hi, Minister. Thanks so much for this. I was just wondering, you mentioned that BC is not opening despite Quebec is reopening to some extent its schools. Can you give us the specifics on what led to the decision not to, because I know there are several thousand kids in school now, but why not widen the number of kids back in school? What specifically did you look at that led you to the decision we're not opening up the classes more?
Well, we haven't come to a decision. What we're working on, as I mentioned earlier, is really focusing on the planning so that when we do, and if and when we do, announce that, for example, before the end of this school year, we have that right. We have a completed plan. I think a couple of other jurisdictions have sort of setting a date ahead of establishing and developing a comprehensive and safe plan. And I think that's backwards. I think what we're doing is working with all of the education stakeholders, working with the Provincial Health Office to really have a tight health and safety protocol that will consider all of the sorts of questions that you would imagine are being asked around PPE, around hand washing stations, around you know, how you schedule children, what percentage of them should return, is it a limited reentry? All of those things are part of the planning process that we're undergoing right now in BC. But I want to reiterate, at the end of the day, it's the science and the data of how we're combating COVID-19 that will determine what is safe and what is the right thing to do. So I appreciate the role the media has played in reporting the regular updates and the very transparent information that the government of BC has disclosed around our modeling in this province. And the Premier and Cabinet, as well as a number of sectors in BC, are talking about a more general reopening because economic hardship is a reality in BC. So when we look at, you know, evolving health and safety protocols, we're not talking just about the school system, although there's an intense amount of focus there amongst school-based leaders. But this is something that is being considered economy and society-wide.
Next question is from Tina Lovegreen, CBC.
Hi, Minister. Can you confirm whether or not teachers, admin staff, or support staff will be wearing PPE when they resume in-class instruction with students, and whether districts are looking to buy PPE now?
I can say that districts have some PPE in terms of the in-class instruction that is happening now. That is not mandatory. That is not part of the protocol at this point. But as I say, when we're planning for a greater number of students and staff in a school building, the health and safety protocol will evolve with that. So those are questions that are under active discussion right now. The reason we're planning is, it's the right thing to do. It's prudent. We know full well that we might not be able to implement those plans, this side of summer break. We're also implementing plans around how to deliver summer school education opportunities as well, because we know there will be some demand for that. So those are things that are under active discussion, if I can put it that way.
Next question is from Jane Side, North Shore News.
Yes, my question, I guess, follows on from that. I'm just wondering, what kind of anticipation do you have for sort of more general students to be back in the classroom, given that most parents aren't going to really be able to be back working in the economy until there's some provision made for their kids to be back in school?
Mm-hmm. That's true, and again, BC has had fewer economic restrictions but more successful social distancing strategies than other jurisdictions. Similarly, our school system has not been completely closed. As I mentioned in this briefing, we have always continued some in-class instruction services, where today's update was in part to tell you that we hope to additionally expand that to help more parents of vulnerable kids or those with complex learning needs who simply are having a tougher time and exacerbating inequities around learning opportunities because the remote learning technologies don't particularly work for them. So that's something that school districts are helping and rallying to provide those additional services. So I think you're going to see the focus for the next while, like say the next few weeks, being on continuing to serve those students who are in classes, whether they're the children of essential service workers or more learners that have special learning needs.
Next, we have Keith Baldry.
Thanks for this, Minister. I hear a lot from teachers, I'm sure you do, and everybody on this phone line hears from them, who are concerned about their personal safety. And given that we don't know everything about this virus yet, it's presenting itself in different ways in different people. There was a story out of the UK yesterday of a bunch of kids under the age of 12 really getting sick with this. So is it actually, are you convinced it's actually safe to open the schools for teachers and kids? And secondly, when you do reopen, are teachers able to not go? They can choose to stay home and not attend class?
Well, I'm convinced that the school services we have today in schools are absolutely safe, and that the protocols that were developed are thorough and they're working. It's really about contemplating what the next steps might be, and that will involve some changes that have to be made around health and safety and different regimes around regular cleaning and how kids look after themselves and physically distance. It's probably going to be difficult for kids of a certain age to strictly adhere to that. But as I've said in recent days and again today, we are going to have a made in BC approach that acknowledges and learns from other jurisdictions, but is based on how we're doing as a province, how we are fighting to not just contain COVID, but to eradicate it. And we are making significant progress in BC. We're in a good position relative to other places. But we need to continue to do some more planning, and we will, of course, will be talking with employee groups. We have involved all of the stakeholders, including unions in the education system, around if and when a return to school is going to happen, what it needs to look like to maintain their absolute protection and put their safety first.
Next question is from Moira Witten, the Tyee.
Hi, Minister. A follow-up to that from my colleague. Some budget cuts have made it so that some schools don't have daytime cleaners right now, hot water, soap and washrooms. How are you planning to keep schools clean to be safe with these issues?
I'm gonna let Stephanie Higginson take a question here, and I think this might be a good one for her. Just a moment.
Thanks, Minister. I think that we're hearing a lot of speculation about what it might look like, and I think it's very important for people to remember that throughout this entire process, we've always taken a measured approach that's based in science. So if we are able to get to a place where we can reopen schools to a larger number of students than are currently being served in them, because it's important to remember that schools aren't closed, then we will ensure the health and safety of students and employees and their families are able to be met when we open those schools up to a larger amount of students. So all along, we have been making sure that every decision that we make at the local level, and also in response to decisions that are being made at the provincial level, that we are able to make sure that we keep the health and safety of students, families, and employees at the core of every decision we make. So we will make sure that schools can operate under health and safety guidelines and protocols that are provided by the Provincial Health Office.
Next question is from Lisa Cordasco, CHLY. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you very much. Can you tell me what percentage of vulnerable students are currently attending classrooms, and what percentage do you plan to increase that to before the end of the school year?
Well, I think the largest number of vulnerable students, and this wouldn't relate to any learning designation, but those that experience hunger regularly and rely on schools in normal times and even more now in the pandemic, it's the meal program. So about 16,000 families are now served by school districts across BC. I mentioned 75,000 meals. That number may have gone up, and I expect that the demand will go up, and our government support will be there along with the business community and the voluntary sector that have rallied to provide those kinds of supports. What I did reference earlier was that there's lots of low incidence kids who have an individual education plan to guide them, that don't need face-to-face in-class instruction. What we're finding, though, is there are some kids who do need speech and language pathologists and other specialist teachers that do need some kind of limited presence in schools, and we have that. Sometimes it's for an hour or two a day. There are also some parents who, and I completely can understand their frustration and their exhaustion. They need some respite, and the school system needs to be there for them. And we're encouraging districts to keep doing what they're doing in the case of those that are providing really good levels of support, and others to enhance their levels of support for families and students like that.
John Crawford, CFTK Terrace.
Yes, Minister, thank you very much for taking the question. You mentioned earlier the inequities that may be existing between in-class instruction that some kids are getting right now and the remote education that a lot of kids are getting. And I'm thinking of people in my area, which is, as you know, a lot of communities in this area don't have the internet service that, say, the city would. So these kids might be falling further and further behind. And is there a concern that at some point they get so far behind that it becomes a permanent problem and they'll never catch up? How can that be addressed?
Yeah. Well, a couple things, and I'll let Stephanie answer this as well from her perspective. We have been working really hard to expand the ability to provide good, fast connectivity, internet service in communities that have been underserved. Our partners, TELUS and Shaw, have been doing a fantastic job expanding those services. There are some kids and families who live in very, very remote locations in BC who are being served by a paper-based or flash drive type delivery of learning materials, and they use the phone to connect with their teachers. So I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of very useful learning going on that doesn't involve particularly sophisticated technology, but we do want to expand video conferencing opportunities and other online resources and apps that teachers can use. I know that the teaching profession is very peer driven, and there's a lot of social media out there and ways that teachers interact with one another where they're passing on really good suggestions. We want to create this culture of best practice. Like nobody would in their right mind would ever devise a system of continuous online learning. It's the best we can do because it's the safest thing we can do We didn't want to be one of those jurisdictions that just closed schools and threw up their hands and said, so much for learning, we'll get back to you later. We wanted to provide continuous ongoing learning opportunities, and we've done that. I think it's wise to try and get better and better and more sophisticated at it, because as we have heard from health experts around the world, including our own, there could be a second wave in the fall. We could get back to school and then have a disruption. It makes sense to invest in getting better and better at what we're doing, and that means connectivity with rural communities. And Citizen Services is another ministry that's assisting in making sure that internet service is available to all British Columbians, no matter where they live.
Thank you. I think, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, but the question is important, pointing out the risk of inequity and the gaps of inequity widening under our current context. And I think that you've shone a light on one of the reasons why it is important that if and when we can start expanding services to students, we need to do that. However, I would also say that I wouldn't be super concerned that students are going to fall so far behind that it is too late, because what we also have in BC is the best teaching professionals in the world who will respond to the needs of the students when they are able to see the students in front of them. Every year in September, teachers evaluate and assess the students for where they're at, and they design their learning according to where they're at. And I think what we are doing at the local level is starting to plan for some type of professional development that will allow teachers to adjust their teaching so that they can meet the needs of the students who come to them in September, perhaps having had a long gap in their instruction.
Next question is from Rob Monroe, Info News.
Hi, Minister. We're getting a lot of pushback from parents who are just overwhelmed by this. We have one that has 2 preteens, and they're on Zoom a few times a day and apps and all these kinds of things. Is there any thought, particularly with the younger ages, to have just, as you say, throw up your hands and say, give them a break, and start again in the fall, so the parents who are trying to work and working from home and all these sorts of things can, keep their mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think the teaching guideline and some of the planning documents that the ministry designed in collaboration with the school sector. First of all, the message is parents need to give themselves a break. They really should not try and replicate being a teacher, but there are lots of resources that we've provided on our Keep Learning site and elsewhere that will give lots of useful tips to helping them work with their kids. But I think it's important with young children to be in touch with teachers, however that may be organized, whether it's through video conferencing, or if that's not possible, teachers are doing it in other ways through email and over the phone. But to get resources into the hands of young kids, just to keep at it in terms of reading and writing comprehension and mathematics and those kinds of things. But build a schedule that is reasonable. Make sure your kid is getting outdoors and staying healthy and exercising, and don't try and layer too much on. I think we've heard from enough parents that doesn't necessarily work, or it certainly doesn't reduce their anxiety levels. But you're hearing very uneven reports. You're even hearing about some kids really thriving under the new technologies in the environment, and teachers really stepping up and doing a fantastic job. Again, I say nobody would design this school system intentionally, but given where we're at and what we need to do to keep continuous learning happening, there's some amazing examples in British Columbia that are really drawing inspiration.
Maria, are you going to speak? Sorry.
So I'm going to empathize with those parents you're hearing from, because I'm one of them. And, in a moment of COVID confessions, I completely lost the plot on my 9-year-old yesterday. And I think it's really important, as the minister said, for those parents to, give themselves a break. Remember that what you're doing is good enough. And sometimes our children this is happening to them too. And my 9-year-old reminds me of that sometimes in ways that I don't actually see until about 3 hours later. And then I remember why he's acting the way he is. So, I understand that this is very difficult for parents, whether you are working or not working, because if you are not working, then perhaps you're also very concerned about your family's financial well-being. So I would say to them that sometimes it's okay to have the kids go outside and play baseball with them and find find other ways to encourage their learning that isn't necessarily the traditional way that you expect from them when they're in school. We have developed a nightly game of 500 Up in my house where the kids are doing math by catching the baseball and wrestling with each other, and it seems to work. So but you've also hit on another reason why at some point when we are able to, these are good reasons for us to think about ways that we can provide services to more students in the buildings in a way that is safe when and if possible.
Next question is from Maria Teal, Campbell Rivermere.
Hi there. I'm wondering, in a phased approach, what would the next groups of students returning to the classroom be?
I think in some of our initial planning and looking at what other jurisdictions are doing, you do have a different approach for, say, primary school aged children, middle school aged kids, and high school and senior high school students. So, you know, in terms of the amount of time they need to be in the building, obviously the older kids get, the better they are able to handle, you know, primarily online-driven solutions, and they also tend to study in much larger buildings in elementary schools. So, it's really a planning exercise that balances what's going to be effective in terms of returning to in-class instruction, what's going to be meaningful in a day or half day, if that's the case, and also and primarily it is guided by what is healthy, what is safe to do. So. That's why I say the work on updating health and safety protocols is really where we start on contemplating a possible return to in-class instruction.
We have time for one more question. Maria Rantanen, Richmond News. She's gone. Okay, I think that wraps it up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.